In the southwest corner of Pakistan lies a land that is both a treasure and a ticking time bomb, Balochistan. It makes up almost 44% of Pakistan's landmass, yet its population is barely 6% of the country. A vast, rugged, and resource-rich region sitting at the crossroads of South Asia, the Middle East, and Central Asia. For decades, Balochistan has been described as Pakistan's Achilles heel, a place where the state's writ is challenged not by an external enemy, but by its own people. Why does Balochistan matter so much? The answer lies in three things: resources, location, and geopolitics. First, resources. Balochistan is home to some of Pakistan's most valuable natural wealth. From natural gas fields in Sui that have fueled the country's industries for decades, to copper and gold reserves like the Reko Dik mine, valued at nearly $500 billion. The irony, while Balochistan's gas has kept the lights on in Punjab and Sindh, its own villages remain in darkness. Second, location. Balochistan is Pakistan's gateway to the Arabian Sea, hosting the deep-water port of Gwadar, the crown jewel of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC. For Beijing, Gwadar isn't just a port, it's a strategic foothold in the Indian Ocean, a direct route for energy supplies from the Gulf, and a way to bypass the choke points of the Malacca Strait. For Pakistan, it was supposed to be the centerpiece of economic revival. Yet today, Gwadar is surrounded by barbed wire and security checkpoints, looking less like an economic hub and more like a fortress under siege. And third, geopolitics. Whoever controls Balochistan controls the future of connectivity between South Asia, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Iran looks eastward with interest. The United States once eyed Gwadar during its presence in Afghanistan. And India? For New Delhi, Balochistan represents Pakistan's deepest vulnerability, a place where Islamabad's narrative of unity shatters. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Pakistan is not just failing to integrate Balochistan, it is actively losing it. Decade after decade, the state's policies have created a cocktail of resentment, rebellion, and rage. From broken promises of autonomy to military crackdowns and disappearances, the trust deficit has turned into an abyss. Today, the question is no longer whether Balochistan is restive, it is whether Pakistan can hold on to it at all. To understand why Pakistan is losing its grip on Balochistan, you have to go back to the very beginning, 1947, the year of partition. While the new state of Pakistan celebrated its birth, the people of Balochistan were not cheering in unison. In fact, Balochistan was not even fully part of Pakistan at that time. The region comprised princely states, the most prominent being Kalat, which initially sought independence. For a brief moment, Kalat's Khan tried to negotiate a special status, perhaps autonomy under Pakistan's umbrella. But by 1948, negotiations collapsed, and Pakistan moved in militarily. The message was clear: there would be no room for separate aspirations. It was the first scar in a relationship that would never heal. From the start, the Balochi felt they were treated as subjects, not citizens. Their land was absorbed, their leaders sidelined, and promises of autonomy evaporated into thin air. The one-unit scheme of the 1950s, which merged all Western provinces into one administrative bloc, further alienated them. This centralization of power in Karachi and later Islamabad left Balochistan voiceless. For a people fiercely proud of their identity, it was an insult carved in stone. The first insurgency erupted in 1948, but it was small and short-lived. However, the pattern was set: neglect, repression, and resistance. The 1958 uprising came next, sparked by land disputes and resentment against federal control. It was brutally crushed, but the flames never fully died out. They smoldered, waiting for oxygen. Then came the big one, The 1973 insurgency, often called the largest Balochian rebellion in Pakistan's history. This was not a ragtag uprising. It was organized, widespread, and politically charged. The trigger? The dismissal of Balochistan's elected government by Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Once again, democracy was sacrificed on the altar of centralization. Islamabad sent in troops, and the province became a war zone. Thousands died, entire villages were uprooted, and an entire generation of Balochistan grew up knowing the military boot better than the ballot box. And then there was the 2004 insurgency, the one that refuses to end even today. Sparked by the killing of Nawab Akbar Bugti, an influential Baloch leader, the conflict spiraled into a prolonged insurgency that has drained Pakistan militarily, politically, and economically. Instead of dialogue, Pakistan responded with what it knows best: force. But force has limits, and in Balochistan, it has backfired spectacularly. The pattern of these decades is painfully clear. Islamabad promises development but delivers deprivation. It promises autonomy but enforces control. It speaks of rights but practices repression, and every broken promise becomes a rallying cry for separatism. If Pakistan's mistakes planted the seeds of discontent, its heavy-handed tactics watered them until they grew into a full-blown nationalist movement. Today, the Baloch insurgency is not just an armed struggle, it's a deep-rooted political and cultural resistance against Islamabad's authority. But how did it evolve to this point? The early Baloch insurgencies were sporadic and localized, mostly led by tribal chieftains, angry at the loss of autonomy. But over the decades, the movement transformed. What was once tribal is now ideological. What was once fragmented is now connected through shared grievances. The modern phase of Balochian nationalism began after 2004, triggered by the killing of Nawab Akbar Bugti. Bugti wasn't just another tribal leader, he was a symbol of Baloch identity. His death at the hands of the Pakistan army became a rallying cry that electrified the province. For many, Baloch it was proof that Islamabad would never treat them as equals. It was the final nail in the coffin of trust. Since then, insurgency has become an everyday reality in Balochistan. Separatist groups like the Balochit Liberation Army, Balochit Republican Army, BRA, and Balochit Liberation Front, BLF, have emerged as key players in this conflict. Their tactics have grown bolder, more sophisticated, and more symbolic. Attacks on security forces, ambushes on supply lines, and even strikes deep inside urban centers have become routine. These groups aren't just targeting soldiers, they're targeting the very symbols of the Pakistani state: pipelines, communication networks, and most importantly, CPEC infrastructure. But the Baloch insurgency isn't confined to the mountains of Dera Bukti or the deserts of Makran anymore. It has gone transnational. Leaders operate from exile, lobbying in Europe and America, raising awareness about human rights abuses. Diaspora networks amplify their voices through social media, turning local grievances into global headlines. In a world hyper-connected by technology, Pakistan's attempts to suppress information have failed spectacularly. And here lies Islamabad's nightmare. The insurgency has entered the fifth phase, a phase where it is not only about guns but about narratives. Every missing person becomes a story of state brutality. Every body dumped on a roadside becomes an image of oppression. And no matter how tightly Pakistan tries to control the media, the truth leaks out through smartphones and hashtags. What makes this insurgency particularly dangerous for Pakistan is that it coincides with a period of unprecedented internal weakness, an economic meltdown, political chaos, and a military stretched thin between multiple fronts. The state simply doesn't have the resources or the legitimacy to win hearts and minds. And then there's the elephant in the room. The local population no longer trusts Pakistan. Decades of exploitation, taking gas from Suez, while leaving local villages in darkness. Giving Chinese companies contracts while ignoring local workers have created an unbridgeable chasm. To the Balochid, Pakistan is not a homeland, it's an occupying force. Pakistan responds with the same old playbook: more troops, more checkpoints, more disappearances. But history has shown that you can't bomb an idea out of existence. And the idea of Balochid nationalism is stronger today than it has ever been. The question isn't whether Balochistan is restless, it's whether Islamabad still has the tools or the trust to govern it. Today every indicator points in one direction. Pakistan is losing control not just militarily but politically and psychologically. The trust deficit is now an abyss for decades. Islamabad promised development, autonomy, and representation. Yet the reality on the ground is stark. Balochistan remains the poorest province in Pakistan, with the lowest literacy rates, highest infant mortality, and barely any industrial infrastructure. Natural gas from Sui powers factories in Punjab, but many Balochid villages still rely on firewood. Gwadar, touted as the next Dubai under CPEC, remains under tight security, fenced with barbed wire, where locals complain they can't even access clean drinking water. When economic exclusion meets political alienation, the result is explosive. Today most Balochid don't see Islamabad as a government, they see it as a foreign occupier, and this perception is cemented every time a Balochid activist disappears without trial, or a mass grave is discovered in the desert. The military approach has failed. Pakistan's response has always been the same: deploy more troops. Entire districts have been turned into garrisons. Checkpoints choke highways. The frontier corps dominates daily life. But this iron fist policy has backfired spectacularly. Instead of crushing dissent, it fuels it. Every military operation creates more insurgents than it kills. Every missing person turns into a martyr for the cause of freedom. Economy and exhaustion. Pakistan's collapsing economy adds another layer to the crisis. Islamabad can barely keep its own lights on, let alone invest in Balochistan's development. CPEC, which was supposed to be the game changer, is now seen as a Chinese project guarded by Pakistani guns, not a lifeline for the locals. Even China, once confident about Gwadar, is losing patience. Security threats have forced Beijing to pull back workers and rethink timelines. Where does India fit in? Here's the irony: Pakistan loves to blame India for everything in Balochistan. In Islamabad's narrative, every bomb, every ambush, every protest is funded by ROL. Is this entirely true? No. Is it entirely false? Also no. The reality is this: India doesn't need to do much. Pakistan is destroying itself from within. Every time the Pakistan army disappears an activist, India gains a talking point. Every time Gwadar's locals protest against water shortages, India gains leverage in the global narrative. In fact, New Delhi's smartest move has been staying largely in the shadows, using information, diplomacy, and narrative power rather than boots on the ground. Pakistan cries foul about Indian consulates in Afghanistan once being ROL hubs. Perhaps they were, but now even without Afghan bases, India's influence comes through soft power, raising the Balochistu in international forums, giving exiled Balochistu leaders platforms, and simply letting Pakistan's failures speak louder than any propaganda could. The silent war. This is why we call it a silent war. There are no Indian tanks rolling into Balochistan. There is no visible military front. Instead, there is narrative dominance. Pakistan accuses, India denies. Meanwhile, global think tanks, human rights organizations, and international media start asking uncomfortable questions. Why is the world's biggest Islamic democracy disappearing its own people? Why does the richest province in resources remain the poorest in development? And for India, every such question is a strategic win without firing a single shot. When China entered Balochistan through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, in 2015, it wasn't just building roads and ports, it was buying a dream. a dream of connectivity, where Gwadar would become the beating heart of China's maritime strategy, a critical node in the Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), and a safe alternative to the Malacca Strait. For Beijing, CPEC was a $62 billion gamble to secure its energy lifelines from the Middle East and Africa. For Pakistan, it was a golden ticket, a chance to revive its stagnant economy and turn Gwadar into the next Dubai. Fast forward to today, and that dream looks more like a nightmare. Gwadar, instead of bustling with trade, is surrounded by military checkpoints. The locals who were promised prosperity are protesting in the streets. The port itself, underutilized, underconnected, and under constant threat from insurgents. The security problem Beijing can't ignore. China is used to operating in difficult environments. But even Beijing did not anticipate the scale of resistance in Balochistan. Chinese engineers have been kidnapped, convoys ambushed, and projects bombed by insurgent groups like the Balochisitan Liberation Army, BLA. These are not random attacks, they are strategic strikes aimed at the heart of CPEC. In August 2021, a suicide bomber targeted a convoy carrying Chinese workers, killing several. The message was loud and clear: Gwadar is not safe. China has responded by demanding security guarantees, even forming its own security units in collaboration with Pakistan. But no matter how many fences Islamabad builds around Gwadar, it cannot fence off the anger of an entire province. Security is not a military problem, it's a political one, and Pakistan has failed to grasp this simple truth. The economic disappointment for the people of Balochistan. CPEC was sold as a lifeline, a chance for jobs, education, and development. Instead, they see Chinese companies bringing their own workers, sealing off project sites, and extracting resources without sharing benefits. Gwadar locals complain that even clean drinking water is a luxury. In their eyes, CPEC is not development, it's exploitation. This perception is toxic, and it's spreading. Anti-China sentiment is now a key theme in Balochistan. Gama Trina. Savenet One, it's better. Slogans like Gwadar is ours, and Stop CPEC have become common in protests. For Beijing, this is a nightmare scenario, spending billions on a port that locals despise and insurgents attack. India's strategic advantage. Here's where the geopolitical chessboard gets interesting. India doesn't have to sabotage CPEC. Pakistan is doing it for them. Every attack on Chinese workers, every protest in Gwadar, every delay in infrastructure strengthens New Delhi's argument that CPEC is a strategic blunder. India has consistently opposed CPEC because it runs through Gilgit-Baltistan, a disputed territory. Now India can point to security chaos in Balochistan. The project is doomed. The longer China stays entangled in Balochistan, the project is doomed. The longer China stays entangled in Balochistan, the more it bleeds resources and credibility. For India, that's a silent victory. While Beijing and Islamabad pour billions into securing a hostile province, New Delhi invests in its own infrastructure, building ports like Chabahar in Iran as an alternative trade route. In the race for regional influence, CPEC was supposed to be Pakistan and China's trump card. Today it looks more like a liability than an asset. The bigger question for Beijing: China prides itself on being a pragmatic power. It likes certainty, stability, and predictable returns on investment. Balochistan offers none of that. If insurgency escalates and Pakistan's economy collapses further, Beijing might have to make a hard choice: keep throwing money into a black hole or cut its losses. Either way, Pakistan loses leverage. And here's the harsh truth: the very project that was supposed to bind Pakistan and China together is now straining their relationship. Beijing is asking hard questions. Islamabad has no good answers. When nations begin to break, it often starts at the edges. For Pakistan, that edge is Balochistan. The question now is not whether the province is discontent, but whether Islamabad has the strength or the credibility to hold on to it in the years ahead. The most likely outcome in the near term is a continuation of the current cycle. a low-intensity insurgency that drains Pakistan slowly and relentlessly. Islamabad will respond the only way it knows how, with more troops, more checkpoints, and more disappearances. The insurgents will retaliate with ambushes, bombings and attacks on CPEC infrastructure. This war of attrition is bleeding Pakistan economically, politically, and militarily. Investors flee instability, Chinese confidence wanes, and Gwadar remains little more than a ghost port. Meanwhile, Pakistan spends billions fighting its own citizens, while its economy spirals into collapse. For India, this is a strategic advantage without the cost of a single soldier, a rival distracted and weakened by its own hand. There is another possibility. Islamabad could attempt a political solution by granting greater autonomy and a fairer share of resources to the Balochistan. But trust is gone. Every promise made in the past has been broken. Even if an agreement is signed, who guarantees that it will be honored? The Pakistani military, which sees Balochistan as a strategic is unlikely to allow any arrangement that reduces its control. This means that even the most optimistic political compromise is fragile at best, a temporary bandage on a wound that runs deep. And then there is the nightmare scenario, independence. For decades it seemed impossible. Pakistan's military would never allow it, and the world is wary of redrawing borders. But history is filled with surprises. Nations do not collapse in one grand moment. They collapse gradually, then suddenly. If Pakistan's economic meltdown accelerates, if political chaos turns into civil disorder, if the military fractures under pressure, Balochistan could slip from Islamabad's grip without a formal declaration. Independence might arrive not through a treaty, but through reality, the state existing only on paper, not on the ground. Should that day come, the map of South Asia changes overnight. Pakistan loses its largest province, its access to the Arabian Sea narrows, and its position as a strategic player evaporates.
What about India?
Would it intervene militarily? No, it doesn't have to. New Delhi understands the power of patience. Ever since Prime Minister Modi's Independence Day speech in 2016, when he mentioned Balochistan from the Red Fort, India has signaled its intent to keep the issue alive diplomatically and in the global narrative. Its strategy is simple: highlight Pakistan's human rights abuses in international forums, provide platforms for Baloch's voices in exile, and let Islamabad's own failures do the heavy lifting. This isn't a war of tanks and guns, it's a war of perception, and in this silent conflict, time is India's greatest weapon. The harsh truth is that Pakistan is losing Balochistan not because of what India is doing, but because of what Pakistan has done to itself. Decades of injustice, exploitation, and broken promises have created a chasm that no military operation can bridge. Every crackdown deepens resentment. Every missing person strengthens the cause of separatism. Islamabad can keep blaming foreign conspiracies, but the enemy is internal. A history of neglect and repression. Balochistan is more than a province. It is Pakistan's ultimate test of survival. Fail here, and the very idea of united Pakistan begins to unravel. If that unraveling begins, neither CPEC, nor China, nor any army will be able to stitch it back together. The battle for Balochistan will not be won on the falls of its people, and as of today, Pakistan is losing that war, slowly, silently, but surely.